The Shadowverse Evolve World Finals is finally happening, and today we're going to take a look at all of the decks that I expect to do insanely well at this tournament. In case you're unaware, the format for the World Finals is the same as the final last chance qualifiers, being just post Musim, not including set 3 Flame of Levitain. This means that we can actually take a look at the most recent LCQ results and actually compute which decks have the most statistical advantage to do well. What I did is that I went through every single top 8 deck list from all of the LCQs that happened with the current set, and I gave every single topping list a tally. If a deck came first, I gave it 4 points. If it came second, I gave it 3 points. If it got top 4, it gets 2 points. And if it got top 8, it gets 1 point. So for example, if Forest, for example, gets first twice, second once, top 4 twice, and then top 8 twice, it would have 17 points. So I decided to take all of the classes and all of the decks that were winning across these events, which the top 4 of, by the way, you can actually check on the official Shadowverse Evolve website yourself. And so now let's go over the top 5 decks that made it onto this ranking. Unfortunately, the 2 that did not make it are Rune and Abyss. Rune actually had 0 tops in the entire post-Musim format and only had 1 Earthright top prior to that, but Abyss did manage to sneak in 2 top 8s, both of which were variants of Aggro Abyss. So you can see a list here, unfortunately making it just a little short of being in the contention for the top 5 decks for Worlds. But I wouldn't be too surprised if somebody does bring Abyss to Worlds just to kind of make use of that aggro game plan, but it does feel like it might be a little rough into that Musim matchup. Now in 5th place, a deck that I personally expected to do very well with Musim releasing, as well as of course the restrictions for Musim being in play, is Havencraft. So Haven actually also only got 2 tops, the same as Abyss, but the weight of these tops is a lot higher because Haven won the London LCQ, thus coming in first place, giving it 4 points, and also got a top 8 finish. The list of reference here, of course, is going to be the first place from London, which you can actually see contains 0 of the Musim cards and is still a very strong deck just from set 2 itself. Control Haven I expect to do quite well into this format too, because it can sustain itself really well with a lot of its powerful spells and effects, and then of course just have that unbeatable win con of Heavenly Aegis. That being said, it is a little bit slow to set up, and especially if you brick, it is very hard to deal with. So if you want to take such a relatively, I don't want to say high risk, but higher than usual risk deck to Worlds over something like some of the top scorers here might be a different question. Now up next, I think, is something that a lot of people will be surprised about, which is Forest. Forest is actually almost tied with Sword, spoiler alert, for 3rd place at 17 points as I mentioned before, winning 2 LCQs, coming second once, getting top 4 twice, and getting top 8 twice. I personally didn't expect Forest to do this well because in Japan, when Musim was at full power, Forest was just kind of ignored. But in the end, Musim is actually one of the biggest supports Forest could have asked for because they got so many strong sword tools, so many good bounce effects, some really good strong spells too. So overall, Forest was eating super well from this format, and a lot of people just didn't even realize it. The Forest list that came first place in the Singapore LCQ might be the best example of all these new cards in action, as basically all of the lists that topped from the ones that I named were all of the Silverbolt variant. And this one is kind of showing the most amount of the new Musim cards. So you can really see here, we already talked about stuff like the Marvelous Sunday, Shinko Windy being good cards. Of course, Silent Suzuka is a strong, 4-cost 4-1 with Storm that you can evoke to go for even more damage. But I think we kind of slipped on Gold City. I remember when Gold City released initially in Japan, I was like, wait, isn't this card kind of good? 4-cost 3-3 with Storm, if you have, 8 cards on the field between you and your opponent, isn't that hard to achieve in the Musim format. And on Fanfare, she recovers 3 play points, so she's effectively a 1-cost 3-3 with Storm, right? So you can easily pair her with something else, or even if you're missing a bit of damage from Silverbolt, this can be the extra damage you need. And I think the addition of Eat Fast, Yum Fast just works really well in this list too, because it searches for those Storm followers like Gold City or Silent Suzuka, or gives extra attack to those Storm followers. So it's really, really strong. Of course, it does add a bit of that possibility to brick, but I think as a top end is really good. Asian Flash is also super underrated, I think, initially into the Musim format, as being a very easy opponent's follower bounce card is really strong, because this means that you can bounce your opponent's big cost followers. This means that you have ways to answer the mirror match. You have ways to answer the Musim matchups, especially when they get really tall and wide. So overall, the Silverbolt Forest I think is a very high contender for Worlds. Even though it's 4th on my list, I honestly wouldn't be surprised seeing this in top 8 at Worlds or even winning the whole thing. And that kind of goes for all of the decks now going forward. The second North American LCQ also had a third place forest list that's a bit different, running Rose Queen focus instead. And we see a lot more of the regular forest cards being played here, like Roach, and also Noble Fairy is an interesting option, giving you follower destruction as an option on combo. And so this one seems to be a lot more of like the board hate base that just kind of goes into Rose Queen as a win con. So if you want to keep playing Rose Queen instead of going to the Silver Bolt route, that's also another option. And because this player also qualified, I wouldn't be too surprised if they took this or a similar list to their Worlds play as well. So just something to keep an eye out on stream. And I already spoiled it, but Sword is going to be the third best deck from the LCQs that I expect to do really well at Worlds. This one's all mid-range Sword getting those tops though, as we had a total of 2 Swords getting first place at the LCQs, 1 of them getting second, 2 getting top 4, and 4 of them getting top 8. So that scores for a total of 19 points, just a little bit above a Forest. And as I said, these are all mid-range lists that essentially just put in Tokai Teo as well as Narita Brian into the deck, but we can still take a look at some examples. We see a pretty innovative list from the Germany LCQ first place, where they actually ran a bit of the Princess engine. So we can of course see Gunner Maid Seria that searches for Princess followers and adds them to your hand. So I highlighted this card way back when, but this of course can search your Pompous Princess, searches your Otohime, searches your Aurelia. So that way you can play some of those cards as one-ofs that you can kind of target out. And you know, her being herself, a 2-cost 1/3 means that she's good on stats to trade into your opponent's aggro board too. So as a utility card, she's pretty good, and we see a pretty heavy lineup of quicks here as well. You see the Unbridled Fury pretty often in these lists, but Whole-Souled Swing is a new one where you get to ping 3 damage for 2 cost onto an enemy follower and then get a knight into your EX area. So especially in taking care of some of those Musim boards, this is a pretty good tech, so we might see some of it at Worlds too. I think for a more typical list, we take a look at the second North American LCQ, where you see kind of the typical lineup of like 3 Alexander, we got a bit of Emilia in here, Narita Brian, 2 Tokai Teos, Luminous Knight for aggro. So this is kind of the sword list I would expect to see, honestly. Like, this is when I think of mid-range sword at Worlds, this is the list I'm seeing. And so I think, especially for the players that are preparing for Worlds or preparing to watch Worlds, these are probably the cards you want to know the best, because I expect sword to be very popular. Like, whether it's going to win or not is a different story. I think it's relatively well placed in this format, as you can see by it being pretty high on the rankings, but I do think it's going to be very popular, that's for sure. And in second place, of course, it's going to spoil the first place, we're going to have Dragoncraft. So Dragon had a total of 14 tops, which compared to Sword's 8 is a lot. But even with those 14 tops, it only accumulated 21 points. That might be pretty surprising because Dragon actually won none of the LCQs. Dragon managed to come second once, it managed to top 4 5 times, and it managed to top 8 times. This is the most top 4ing deck, so that's kind of a interesting thing to think about. This isn't the deck that's winning as much as Sword or Forest at these LCQs, but is definitely one of by far the most represented. And of course, all of the Dragon lists are Discard Dragon. They are quite different in terms of their decks and ratios, but they all are joined by the discard engine that they play. And I particularly want to feature Kriko's Dragon list, which was 3rd place in both Germany and also got top 4 in London too. So here we can see that the loss of Shenlong has made them pivot to new recovery options, and that in particular is Super Creek. So her being a on fanfare heal 5 tier leader as a 6-cost 5/5 is pretty good. So when you need that emergency healing that Shenlong would usually offer, that is a different option you have instead. And being able to top 4 with the same list across 2 events is really impressive. So considering that they qualified for Worlds, I would expect that this list might actually go unchanged into the event too, potentially. It's hard to say. This is an international caliber event we're talking about compared to just a European one. But I do want to highlight another Dragon list that I found really interesting from all of these LCQs that was also in Germany, played by Doom Templar, which as you can see runs the Seiyun Sky. Seiyun Sky is another card that I completely slept on from Musim myself, who is a 3-cost 1/3 with Storm and Intimidate. Intimidate means this follower can't be attacked, so even if you go into the face with this, on strike she gets +1 attack, so she's a 2/3 going face, and now your opponent can't attack back into her, so they can use spells and effects to destroy her or deal damage to her, but they cannot attack. So especially going first and playing this on curve, like whether you have Oracle or not, I think it's pretty good because it makes it a little bit hard for your opponent to answer. And so I think we've been seeing the inclusion of Seiyun Sky quite a lot in Dragon lists as of late too, and as you can see, all of the lists we've shown, they all run the discard engine, which of course focuses around Dragomancer's rights to ping damage to your opponent's followers or face at the end of the turn. And then of course you still run All Goody Cat because it synergizes so well to just like finish off the game. But another interesting Musim card that's played here is Take a Jab, which everyone thought was just a bit of a meme card, but it's a 2-cost amulet at the start of your main phase, rolls a 6-sided die, and if you happen to get the 1 on 6 chance to roll a 1, you deal yourself 5 damage. But if you get a 2, 3, 4, or 5, you draw 1, so it's usually going to be drawing you a card, and if you roll a 6, you heal 3 and then destroy it. So you're basically looking at a 1/3 chance every turn to get an extra card draw, which is actually really huge. There is a small chance you're going to ping 5 to yourself, and if that happens, I mean, bad luck, I guess. But generally speaking, you're going to be just getting more card draw out of this, which I guess with the risk included is pretty worth it. And if you roll the 6 and get to heal 3 and destroy it, well, I hope you got at least 1 draw out of it before you did so. So those are the dragon lists, and of course, there's going to be a lot of discard dragon at Worlds too. And I expect that we see a lot of the text that we've seen from the lists at the LCQs to be incorporated into the World Finals list as well. And of course, the winningest deck of them all that I think a lot of people were kind of wondering, will it still be the best deck after the restrictions? And looks like that answer is yes, because Musim is the deck I expect to do best at Worlds. It getting a total of 15 tops across the LCQs, just 1 above Dragon, but it has a total of 27 points because it managed to win one of the LCQs, but only 1, so do keep that in mind. It came second 3 times, it got top 4 3 times, and it managed to get top 8 times, tying with Dragon. So there's really a lot of Musim lists we can take a look at, but I think that the second North America LCQ list is one of the really good ones to take a look at for this event. As we can see, it includes all of the good cards you would expect. You've got the Daiwa Scarlet Vodka combo. Of course, that is the main reason why this deck is so strong. Special Week for consistency and Agnes Tachyon for recycling your spells and taking care of your opponent's board. Flowers for You, as I mentioned before, is the 3 of spell that is kind of taking the place of Trail Initiation. Narita Top Road, as I mentioned before, is the card draw that is taking the space of Trail Initiation and Igno Dictus. Asian Flash at 3 is really expected because it's super important in the mirror, like the bounce effect, as we talked about in this 4 segment, is really important. And then we do see, for example, the Outrunning the Encroaching Heat to give that extra storm and damage. And Sakura Chiyono, I think, is also an interesting card where on race she gets you to recycle something from Cemetery. So especially if you lost one of your Daiwa Scarlets, that's really important. And especially sometimes you might mill something important off of Rice Shower, so you kind of need to just get it back. So if you mill 2 Daiwa Scarlets, I guess, you know, you want to have something like Sakura Chiyono just to recycle that. And of course, we're seeing 2 copies now of the Matikane Tannhauser, who is on Fanfare to destroy an enemy amulet, which is really important into the 2 other best decks of this format, which is Sword and Dragon, right? So against Sword, you get to get rid of Leonidas' amulet. Against Dragon, you get rid of the rights. So I think especially if the players going into Worlds are expecting a lot of Dragon as well as Sword, they're going to be playing multiple copies of Matikane Tannhauser. But if you don't, then maybe you can cut her down to 1 or even 0 and make space for some other stuff. But overall, I think this is one of the definitive lists for Musim that I expect to do really, really well at the event. And there's a lot more Musim lists you can take a look at on the official website and go through all of the different LCQs. But I think you'll be seeing a lot of Musim at Worlds itself, so I don't want to take up too much time going over the list right now because you'll be seeing it a lot this weekend. And with that, that is my top 5 decks for Worlds this weekend. I'm so excited to see the action go down. Unfortunately, I'll be commentating on the Vanguard side of things for this year's Worlds, but I'm sure you'll still be able to enjoy this show together with Igni and RZR. And of course, we're also holding some special giveaways to coincide with Worlds 2 where you can win my special Evolve points, so make sure you participate in those as well. With that, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.